Afghanistan, a nation of 37 million people, has one of the fastest-growing populations on the planet and will soon surpass both Canada and Poland in terms of population. It is bordered by Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, China, and Pakistan. Afghanistan is strategically located, connecting Iranian, Central, and East Asian civilizations to India. It is one of the most mountainous countries in the world, but it also has a vast network of rivers and fertile valleys created by the melting snow from the Hindu Kush and other mountain ranges. Over 4,000 years ago, farmers in this region began to urbanize. However, very little is known about the first ancient city-states, other than the fact that those in the north, in the land that later became known as Bactria, were culturally connected to Central Asian peoples, while those in the southeast were heavily influenced by the Indus Valley civilization. Some cities in the southeast were likely founded by colonists from the south. Until further archaeological work is conducted, Afghanistan's ancient past will remain largely mysterious. Kabul, the current capital of Afghanistan, is believed to have been continuously inhabited for over 3,500 years. However, the exact origins of the city and the people who built it are unknown. In the 7th century BC, the Medes, a northern Iranian people, were the first to conquer and unite this land under their rule. Their rule lasted a little over a century before they were overthrown by the closely related Achaemenid Persians, who divided the empire into provinces called satrapies. By the time of Alexander the Great's conquests, Persian people, language, culture, and religion were prevalent in what is now Afghanistan, along with significant Buddhist and Greek minority populations. The Persians had resettled from their western provinces in the preceding centuries. Alexander faced strong resistance during his conquests in Bactria, which likely motivated his marriage to the Bactrian princess Roxana and the birth of their son, also named Alexander. This marriage secured the allegiance of much of the Bactrian nobility and people, and access to India through the strategically important Khyber Pass. Alexander also founded several Greek colonies in the region that later became important political, commercial, and military centers. The Macedonian generals Seleucus and his descendants ruled over much of the eastern portion of Alexander's empire in the years following his death at the age of 32. Control over Bactria in the Indus River Valley was tenuous at best before 300 BC, as much of this territory had been lost to the Indian Mauryan Empire of Chandragupta. In the peace that followed the war between the two empires, Chandragupta married Seleucus's daughter and gifted his father-in-law 500 trained war elephants, which he used to great effect in his wars in the west. Not long after, the Greek cities of Bactria overthrew Seleucid rule, establishing a wealthy kingdom that controlled much of the land trade to and from China and India. They were able to withstand a major Seleucid invasion and a nearly 3-year-long siege of their capital city of Balkh, causing the exhausted Seleucids to sue for peace. Over the next 2 decades, the Seleucid Empire was greatly weakened by the rise of another one of their former vassals, the Parthians. In the southeast, the Mauryan Empire collapsed. The Greco-Bactrians were then able to effectively fill much of the power vacuum left by these two empires, but their success was halted by internal division. As much of the army was in India expanding Greco-Bactrian territory, the king was overthrown by a usurper, splitting the empire into 2 kingdoms, which both experienced several decades of relative stability and prosperity and the flourishing of a culture that was a unique amalgamation of Greek, Iranian, Indian, and other Central Asian cultures. After the Greco-Bactrians suffered a series of severe military defeats by the Parthians, they were overrun by successive waves of nomadic invaders. The most powerful of these tribal confederations were the Uz and the Saka, or Scythians, who established control over the lower Indus Valley. The Uz settled in Bactria and largely assimilated with the local people over time. After the waves of nomadic invasions calmed down to some extent, the Parthians then conquered much of the east up until the Indus River. The Parthian Arsacid dynasty was very hands-off in their style of governance and were content as long as taxes were paid and men supplied to the army when needed. As they became increasingly focused on halting Roman expansion into Mesopotamia, the Parthian noble family that had defeated the Scythians and had seized control over the Indus River seceded from the empire, establishing the Surin kingdom, or more commonly called the Indo-Parthian kingdom. Although they ceased to pay taxes and their king claimed equal status to the Parthian great king, the two states appear to have been allies and deeply involved in each other's politics. In the north, the Greco-Bactrian people and Uz tribes formed the Kushan kingdom and became an empire at the expense of the Parthians. They then expanded deep into Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent. The Kushans worshipped Greek as well as Hindu gods, but gradually over time, Buddhism became more prevalent and was widely promoted within the empire's borders. Buddhist merchants and missionaries also traveled to Han China, and many believe they were the first to introduce Buddhism to China. The Kushan Empire was the crossroads of the world, with manufactured goods from as far away as China and Rome. And Oxus and Ethiopia would have been common sites in the great cities of the Kushan Empire. In the west, the Parthians succumbed to internal infighting, which allowed the Sassanid Persians to overthrow them. The Sassanid Persians viewed themselves as the re-establishment of the ancient Achaemenid Persian Empire that Alexander had toppled. The reinvigorated Persians successfully campaigned to the north, south, east, and west, quickly overrunning the Kushan Empire. They established the Kushan Shahs as vassal kings of a greatly diminished territory and gradually stripped them of their military and administrative power during the intermediate period of Sasanian decline. The nomadic Keturites and then the Hephthalites gained control over the eastern portion of the empire and, like the Uzi before them, largely adopted much of the local culture before being reconquered by the Sasanians. It was during Sasanian rule that the first recorded instance of the term Afghan was made in reference to the people inhabiting the mountainous eastern provinces of the empire. This term is likely derived from the Pashtun ethnic group, which is the largest in Afghanistan. By the time of this region's conquest by the Arab caliphates, Buddhism and the Persian Zoroastrian faith were the dominant religions in the land. However, it proved difficult to control the region as whenever a large Arab army left, the locals would rebel and revert to their ancient customs and self-rule. In the east, Kabul managed to remain an independent wealthy city-state, controlling trade through the Khyber Pass to India. It was not until the late 9th century that the Safarid dynasty, founded by a Persian coppersmith born in southwestern Afghanistan, successfully rebelled against the Abbasid Caliphate and firmly established local rule. It was during this time that Afghans began to convert to Islam, which the dynasty widely promoted. The Safarids were overthrown by the Samanid Empire, whose rulers claimed descent from the Sasanian Persians and extensively promoted Persian culture and Islam throughout the empire. However, they made the mistake of utilizing Turkic slave soldiers, which eventually overthrew them and established the Ghaznavid dynasty based out of the city of Ghazna in eastern Afghanistan. The Ghaznavids continued the policies of promoting Islam and Persian culture, particularly among the nomadic Turkic tribes that were settled within the empire. The Ghaznavids were greatly weakened by conflict with the Seljuk Turk Empire, which led to their overthrow by the native Ghurid dynasty, which had recently converted from Buddhism to Islam and possibly had Pashtun descent. During the reign of Sultan Ghiyafuddin Muhammad, the Ghurid Sultanate became a major world power, stretching from the Iranian plateau to Bengal in the east. However, after Ghiyafuddin's death, the empire fell into infighting and was rapidly conquered by both the Delhi Sultanate in India and the Empire of Tourism, both of Turkic Mamluk origin. Only 15 years after their conquest of the Ghurid Sultanate, Khorazm was overrun by the Mongol Empire of Genghis Khan, who frequently massacred the populations of cities that did not immediately surrender. The Mongol Empire split into several successor states not long after their conquest of the region. The Ilkhanate, as the name coincidentally implies, fell ill and was ravaged by the plague, wiping out much of the Mongol royal family. And the army and the Ilkhanate fragmented into many small states. The Tajik vassal princes of Herat established a sizable kingdom for a short time. All of these small states were conquered by the Turco-Mongol warlord Tamerlane, who inflicted even greater slaughter and destruction throughout the Near East than the Mongols had done a few generations before. Timur frequently used Afghanistan as his base of operations, and his descendants moved the capital from Samarkand to Herat. The century following Timur's death began with peace and prosperity and ended with internal strife and civil war, with its territory being lost to the Uzbeks in the north, the Safavid Persians in the west, and the emergent Mughal Empire in the southeast, which would go on to conquer most of India. Claiming descent from Timur and Genghis Khan, throughout the 17th century, Afghanistan became a largely autonomous buffer zone between the powerful Safavid and Mughal empires. In 1709, the Pashtun Hotak dynasty successfully rebelled and established a short-lived empire by conquering a great deal of Iranian territory. The Safavid Empire was overthrown by the soldier of fortune Nader Shah, who was the son of a common herdsman and one of the most brilliant military strategists ever to have lived. He reconquered Afghanistan and defeated Ottoman and Mughal armies, but his reign was cut short when he was assassinated at the age of 48. One of his cavalry commanders, Ahmad Shah Durrani, was a Pashtun and returned to his homeland, where a Pashtun tribal confederation selected him as their leader. He used his military experience to great effect, conquering those cities that did not join his cause in Afghanistan. During his long 25-year reign, he successfully campaigned in India 3 times against the Marathas and Mughals, and even sacked their capital city of Delhi in 1757. The Durrani Empire is considered the foundation of the modern state of Afghanistan, and Ahmad Durrani is regarded as the father of the nation. However, the empire declined after they were defeated by the Sikhs and driven out of the Indian subcontinent. The greatest factor influencing their decline may have been economic, as trade was cut off to China due to poor diplomatic relations, and the traffic along the ancient land trade routes connecting India, Iran, and Central Asia all but disappeared. This was due to the expansion of the Russian Empire into Central Asia. The British East India Company was very powerful and controlled maritime trade. When the British left Afghanistan, the country became more isolated than it had been in over 2,000 years. However, it also became more unified because most people in the country practiced the same religion, Sunni Islam. The idea of being Afghan became more important, regardless of tribe or ethnicity. Dost Muhammad Khan came to power by overthrowing the Tehranis and established the Emirate of Afghanistan. The British were afraid that the Russians would take Afghanistan and use it as a base to conquer India. So instead, the British invaded Afghanistan themselves and put the unpopular Iranian king back on the throne. The British faced little resistance and withdrew most of their troops, but the remaining troops were ambushed and suffered heavy casualties. This surprised Great Britain and the Western world. The Afghans then reinstated Dost Muhammad Khan as their ruler. 40 years later, the British invaded again, and after heavy losses on both sides, a peace treaty was signed. Afghanistan became a British protectorate, but the Afghans maintained self-rule and the British handled their foreign affairs. In the 1926, Afghanistan became the Kingdom of Afghanistan and started modernizing and interacting more with the world. In 1973, the monarchy was overthrown by Muhammad Daud Khan in a bloodless coup. He became the president of a republic and sought to modernize the country with support from the Soviet Union and the United States. In 1978, Daud and many of his family members were killed in a communist coup. The new government, backed by the Soviet Union, implemented wide-ranging reforms, causing a rebellion and Soviet involvement in a 10-year war. After the Soviet Union withdrew, the Islamic State of Afghanistan overthrew the government and took control of the cities. They were later overthrown by a U.S. coalition and the Northern Alliance, establishing the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan in 2004. Please leave your comments about what you think the future holds for Afghanistan and what you found most interesting about Afghan history. This is Epimetheus. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to get updates on my new content. Special thanks to my patrons on Patreon who make content like this possible.